When did a criminal hide in your school? I saw a police car parked right at the front entrance of our school. A crowd of students had gathered trying to figure out what was happening. Through the back windows, I could see Principal Graves and Officer Wyatt leaning in talking to someone inside. $20 says it's drugs, Ian said, pushing through the crowd. Remember when they busted that senior last month? Jaden shook her head. Nah, I heard someone got arrested in the bathroom during fourth period. Probably that fight from yesterday. We stood there for 20 minutes watching until the buses started honking. The cop car still hadn't moved, and more officers had arrived. Something felt different about this compared to typical school drama. The next morning, our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Singleton, looked rattled as she took attendance. She kept glancing at the door and checking her phone. Finally, during the break between third and fourth period, she closed our door and turned to face us. "I need to tell you all what happened yesterday," she said, wringing her hands. A former student, about 20 years old, snuck into the building during lunch. The class erupted with questions, but she held up her hand for silence. She explained how this guy had dressed like a current student and walked in with everyone returning from lunch. He'd spent over an hour going through unlocked lockers and stealing laptops from classrooms. "Wait, that's why Mr. Curry was freaking out about his missing laptop?" Catalina asked from the back row. Mrs. Singleton nodded. "He took about 10 laptops total, plus phones and cash from student lockers. The only reason he got caught was because he stopped at the Tim Hortons down the street. She told us someone recognized him and called the school. Police arrested him right there with all the stolen items in his backpack. The weirdest part was that his mom was waiting in a getaway car just 2 blocks away. His own mother was helping him?" Jessica gasped. "That's insane. The whole thing is insane," Mrs. Singleton said. "Imagine throwing away your future for some laptops." During lunch, I was sitting with Catalina when she showed me something on her phone. She'd found the guy's old social media from when he was a student. His last post before graduating was this long rant about the school ruining his life. "Look at this," Catalina said, scrolling through his photos. He was actually pretty popular. Soccer team, honor roll, the whole thing. I leaned over to look when one photo made me freeze. It showed him standing with friends in front of locker 247, my locker. The same one I'd found mysteriously open yesterday, even though I always lock it carefully. "Catalina," I said slowly, "I told you nothing was missing from my locker, right?" She nodded, then her eyes widened. "Wait, you don't think?" Before I could answer, there was a commotion in the hallway. 2 police officers were walking quickly toward the main office with Principal Graves. Through the cafeteria windows, we could see more cop cars pulling into the parking lot. "Something's wrong," I said. "This is way too much police presence for a simple theft." We followed the crowd gathering near the office. Teachers were whispering urgently, and some looked genuinely scared. Ms. Arellano, the attendance secretary, was crying at her desk while talking on the phone. Vice Principal Williams came out and started ushering students away. "Everyone back to the cafeteria. Now, this doesn't concern you." But Ian had already overheard something. As we walked back, he whispered, "I heard them say something about a missing student. Someone from 10th grade. "Missing since when?" Jaden asked. "I don't know, but they're checking attendance records from yesterday. The afternoon was chaos. They put the school on soft lockdown, meaning we couldn't leave our classrooms. Teachers tried to continue lessons, but everyone was distracted. Rumors flew on group chats faster than staff could shut them down. Finally, during last period, Officer Wyatt came to our classroom with a photo. It was a 10th grade girl named Melissa Arellano. He asked if anyone had seen her yesterday or today. Nobody had, but she wasn't someone most seniors would notice anyway. Her parents say she didn't come home last night," he explained. "We need any information about her whereabouts." After he left, our teacher, Mr. Brooks, looked shaken. He kept glancing at his phone and finally just gave up on the lesson. We sat there in tense silence until the final bell. As we were leaving, I overheard 2 officers in the hallway. They were discussing security footage from yesterday. One mentioned something about the former student being seen on camera near the 10th grade lockers for an unusually long time. "But all he took was electronics, right?" the younger officer asked. The older one shook his head grimly. "That's what we thought, until we ran his name through the system." I slowed down, pretending to organize my backpack to hear more. Turns out he escaped from Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital 3 weeks ago. He was committed after a breakdown where he became obsessed with a fellow student. The doctors said he had elaborate delusions about needing to save someone. My blood went cold. I thought about my mysteriously open locker and the missing 10th grader. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. The older officer continued, "We found something else in the security footage. Right before he left the building, he was wheeling what looked like an audio equipment case, the kind the drama department uses, big enough to fit a person." The words hit me so hard I grabbed Catalina's arm without thinking. My grip was too tight, but she didn't pull away because she understood what this meant. The officers kept walking toward the main office, and we stood there frozen for maybe 3 seconds before we both started moving at the same time. We ran down the hallway, dodging other students who were still leaving. My backpack bounced against my back with every step, and I could hear Catalina's keys jangling in her pocket as she kept pace beside me. Principal Graves's office was chaos when we got there. Through the glass doors, I could see at least 6 police officers, plus a bunch of parents all talking at once. Some mom was crying and pointing at papers, while 2 cops tried to calm her down. We hung back near the door, not sure what to do when Vice Principal Williams spotted us. He came over looking tired and asked what we needed. I started talking fast about my locker being open yesterday, and the photo Catalina found of Marcel standing right in front of it. Williams's face went from tired to worried as I explained what we'd just heard about the audio case. He held up his hand to stop me and pulled us into an empty conference room across the hall. The room smelled like old coffee, and someone had left a half-eaten sandwich on the table. Williams pushed the sandwich aside and called Officer Wyatt on his radio. Wyatt showed up within 2 minutes carrying a laptop and looking serious. Williams had me start from the beginning, so I told Wyatt everything while he typed notes on his laptop. He asked when exactly I noticed my locker was open, and I told him it was right after 5th period yesterday. He wanted to know if anything looked different inside, and I had to think hard, but nothing seemed out of place except the lock itself was hanging open. Wyatt asked more questions about whether I'd seen Marcel around school before yesterday, and if I knew Melissa at all. I told him I'd never seen Marcel, and didn't really know Melissa since she was a 10th grader. He opened his laptop and turned it so we could see the screen. The security footage was grainy, but you could see the hallway near the 10th grade lockers. Marcel was there, pushing something on wheels, and even with the bad quality, you could tell it was big. He moved slowly, like whatever it was weighed a lot. The timestamp in the corner said 1:47 p.m., which was right in the middle of 5th period when most kids were in class. Wyatt clicked to zoom in, and we could make out the shape better. It was definitely a black case with those metal corners that equipment cases have, the kind bands use for their speakers and stuff. Wyatt fast-forwarded, and we watched Marcel wheel it down the hall toward the back of the building. He disappeared around a corner where Wyatt said the cameras didn't reach. Williams left to get someone and came back with Miss Perez, the drama teacher. She looked confused until Wyatt showed her the footage and asked about their equipment. She said they had 3 large rolling audio cases for storing microphones and soundboards. One of them was missing since yesterday, but she figured some kids had borrowed it for a project. Wyatt asked how big the cases were, and she held her hands apart, showing they were about 4 feet long and 3 feet high. Big enough for their mixing board, or she paused and looked uncomfortable before finishing her thought. Big enough for other things, too. Miss Perez mentioned the cases had ventilation holes drilled all along the sides, because the electronics could overheat during long shows. She said they'd added the holes themselves with a power drill a few years back. Each case had about 20 holes the size of quarters. Wyatt's face got dark when he heard about the holes, and I realized what he was thinking. If someone was inside, they could breathe through those holes. Ms. Perez looked sick when she understood, too. I remembered something from lunch when Catalina was showing me Marcel's old social media. There were posts about needing to save someone and protect them from bad influences. I told Wyatt about it, and he immediately got on his radio asking someone to check Marcel's recent online activity. He gave them Marcel's full name and told them to look for any blogs or social media from the last few months. We sat there waiting while Wyatt kept typing notes and making calls. Catalina was biting her nails, which she only did when really stressed. Williams kept pacing by the window. After maybe 10 minutes, Wyatt's radio crackled, and another officer's voice came through saying they'd found something. Marcel had a blog he'd been updating for weeks, with long posts about someone he called his angel who needed rescuing. The posts talked about the toxic environment poisoning her, and how only he understood what she really needed. The officer read parts over the radio, and they were scary. Marcel wrote about watching her every day and learning her schedule. He knew what classes she took, and where her locker was. He'd been planning this for a long time. Wyatt grabbed his phone and started making calls, while someone brought over Melissa's class schedule from the main office computer. Her first period yesterday was drama with Miss Perez in the auditorium. They sent someone to get Miss Perez from her classroom, and she came in looking confused until Wyatt explained what they needed. She pulled out her attendance book and ran her finger down the list, nodding that Melissa had been there yesterday morning but seemed really distracted and kept checking her phone. Ms. Perez mentioned Melissa left her backpack under her seat when class ended, which was weird since she usually was super organized. The backpack was still in the drama room, lost and found, and an officer went to bag it as evidence. Catalina suddenly grabbed my arm hard, and her face went pale. She said she just remembered something from yesterday after school when she was waiting for her mom to pick her up. She saw a big black case with metal corners sitting near the loading dock around 4:30. She thought it was just equipment waiting to get loaded for some performance or something, since drama kids were always moving stuff around for shows. Wyatt immediately stood up and asked Catalina to show them exactly where she saw it. We all rushed out of the office and followed Catalina through the hallways toward the back of the school where the loading dock was. The whole area was empty now, but you could see fresh wheel marks on the concrete where something heavy had been rolled toward the parking lot. Wyatt crouched down and took photos of the marks with his phone, while another officer measured them. The marks led from the door all the way to where cars would pull up to load equipment. Wyatt pointed up at a security camera mounted on the wall and said this was one of the few cameras that actually worked right since they'd just fixed it last month after some vandalism. He called dispatch on his radio and told them to pull all footage from that camera starting from noon yesterday and send it to his laptop immediately. We stood there waiting while Wyatt kept checking his laptop and making more calls. I was looking around the loading dock area when something caught my eye near the dumpster. It was a small piece of paper, like it had been torn from a notebook, stuck under the edge of the dumpster wheel. I pointed it out to Wyatt, and he put on gloves before carefully picking it up. The paper had part of an address written on it in shaky handwriting, like someone wrote it while walking or in a car. You could only make out part of it, but it looked like it said something about Maple, and then the numbers 4 and 7. Wyatt put the paper in an evidence bag and immediately got on his radio to dispatch. He told them to check all properties in the area that had Maple in the address, and the numbers 4 or 7. The dispatcher said they'd run it through the system and check tax records for any properties connected to Marcel or his family. About 10 minutes later, Wyatt's laptop beeped and the footage loaded up. We crowded around to watch as he scrolled through to around 3:30 yesterday. There was Marcel clear as day, wheeling the big black case toward a white van parked at the loading dock. The quality was good enough to see part of the license plate, even though the angle wasn't perfect. Wyatt zoomed in and enhanced it, getting enough numbers and letters to run through the system. Within seconds, the results came back, showing the van was registered to Marcel's mother at an address across town. Wyatt's radio crackled with another officer saying patrol units were already heading to that address right now to check if anyone was home. Just then, Miss Arellano appeared in the doorway, with tears streaming down her face. She asked if there was any news about Melissa, and you could hear the desperation in her voice. Wyatt told her gently that they had really strong leads and were close to finding her daughter, that she needed to stay strong. Ms. Arellano nodded, but you could see she was barely holding it together. More officers arrived and started pulling drama students out of their classes to ask questions about the storage room and equipment. One kid mentioned that Marcel used to help with theater tech all the time before he graduated and knew every hiding spot and storage area in the whole auditorium. He said Marcel was obsessed with the sound equipment and would spend hours organizing cables and testing microphones, even when they didn't need it. The kid also said Marcel had keys to a bunch of rooms that he probably wasn't supposed to have, but nobody ever asked him to return them after graduation. Another drama student said she saw Marcel hanging around the school a few times this year, even though he'd graduated 2 years ago. She thought it was weird, but figured maybe he was visiting teachers or something. She said he always seemed to show up during drama class and would stand in the back watching rehearsals. Wyatt was taking notes on everything while coordinating with other officers on his radio. The partial address search came back with 12 possible matches in the area. 3 were residential homes. 1 was that abandoned warehouse Marcel's family used to own for their plumbing business before it went under, and the rest were apartments or businesses. Wyatt told them to prioritize the warehouse and the residential properties, especially any connected to Marcel's extended family. A drama student walked up to the officers and started talking really fast about something that made them all lean in closer. The kid kept pointing down the hallway toward the basement stairs while the officers took notes. Lay was explaining how Marcel used to talk about this old prop storage room that nobody ever went into anymore because it was behind all the broken set pieces. He said Marcel called it the perfect hiding spot one time when they were moving equipment for a play last year. The officers immediately started moving toward the basement while telling Catalina and me to wait in the main office where they could find us. We sat in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching the big clock above the secretary's desk tick forward 1 minute at a time. Other students kept walking by the glass doors trying to see what was happening, but the vice principal kept shooing them away. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing, and Catalina kept checking her phone even though she wasn't getting any messages. The office felt way too quiet, except for the sound of Ms. Arellano typing something on her computer and sniffling every few seconds. 20 minutes went by before Officer Wyatt came back through the door shaking his head at the other officers waiting there. He said the basement storage was completely empty, but they found marks in the dust where something heavy had been dragged recently. There were also fresh footprints in the dirt that hadn't been disturbed in months, according to the layer of dust everywhere else. Just then, another officer's phone buzzed, and she looked at the screen before announcing the partial address search results were in. She read off 3 possible matches, including 2 regular houses in different neighborhoods and an old warehouse on the industrial side of town. Wyatt's face changed when she mentioned the warehouse belonged to Marcel's family before their plumbing business went under 5 years ago. Principal Graves' voice suddenly came over the intercom saying all after-school activities were canceled and parents should pick up their students immediately. Within minutes, the parking lot outside started filling up with cars as worried parents arrived to get their kids. Teachers were trying to direct traffic, but it was getting crazy out there with everyone trying to leave at once. Ian and Jaden pushed through the office door looking for us after hearing from someone that we were involved in whatever was happening. Their eyes went wide as we quickly explained everything from finding out about Marcel's escape, to the missing girl, to the warehouse lead. Ian kept interrupting with questions, while Jaden just stood there looking more and more worried about the whole situation. Officer Wyatt's radio crackled, and he stepped away to answer it while we all watched anxiously. He came back saying Marcel's mother wasn't at her house, but the neighbors saw the white van parked there early this morning. They also saw a silver car leaving around noon, but nobody got a good look at who was driving it. The custodian suddenly appeared in the doorway, pushing his cleaning cart aside to talk to the officers. He said he remembered seeing a big rolling case by the service exit yesterday evening when he was taking out the trash. He figured some drama kids left it there to load later for a performance or something, so he didn't touch it. Then he mentioned something that made everyone freeze, which was that the service door alarm had been turned off somehow. He explained Marcel would definitely know how to disable it from when he used to help move theater equipment in and out. The officers started talking really fast on their radios about checking all the service exits and getting footage from any cameras near them. Ms. Arellano's phone started ringing, and she grabbed it so fast she almost knocked it off the desk. We all watched her face, hoping for good news, but her expression just fell as she quietly told her husband there were no updates yet. The way her voice cracked when she said Melissa's name made my chest feel tight, and I had to look away. More officers kept arriving, and the main office was getting crowded with all the police and school staff trying to coordinate. Someone mentioned they were sending units to both residential addresses, while a special team prepared to check the warehouse. Catalina grabbed my arm and pointed out the window where we could see news vans starting to pull up outside. This was becoming a much bigger deal than just a missing student, and everyone knew it now. The principal came out of his office looking stressed and started talking to parents who were demanding answers about school security. You could hear angry voices in the hallway as more parents arrived wanting to know how someone could just walk in and take a student. Officer Wyatt was studying a map on his phone and marking locations while coordinating with other units about search areas. He kept mentioning time windows and asking about traffic cameras between the school and the warehouse location. The whole scene felt unreal, like something from a TV show, except this was actually happening at our school. My phone buzzed with messages from other friends, asking what was going on, but I didn't even know what to tell them. Everything was moving so fast and getting more serious by the minute as more evidence pointed to Marcel taking Melissa somewhere. Officer Wyatt's radio suddenly crackled to life, and he grabbed it from his belt so fast he almost dropped it. Unit 12 approaching the warehouse on Maple Street, a voice said through the static. Wyatt looked at Principal Graves, and then did something he probably shouldn't have done by clicking his radio to speaker mode. The whole office could now hear everything happening as more units called in their positions. Miss Arellano stood up from her chair and moved closer to hear better, while gripping the edge of the desk. Building looks empty from outside, the first officer reported, but we've got fresh tire tracks in the dirt leading around back. Wyatt told them to hold position until backup arrived, and we all stood there frozen listening to the static. 3 more patrol cars called in their arrival within the next 2 minutes. We could hear them coordinating who would take which entrance over the radio. The tension in the office was so thick you could barely breathe as everyone waited for them to move in. "Going in now," someone said, and we heard doors banging open. Officers were calling out, "Clear," as they moved through different areas of the warehouse. My hands were sweating as I watched Ms. Arellano's face go pale with each passing second. "Got something here?" an officer said. "Food wrappers and water bottles. Looks fresh, maybe from today." Catalina grabbed my arm and squeezed it hard as we listened to them searching. Another voice came through saying they were checking the back section of the building. "White van located behind some old equipment," someone shouted over the radio. "License plate matches, engines still warm to the touch." Ms. Arellano made a small gasping sound, and Principal Graves moved closer to support her. The officers reported they were searching the van and finding things inside. "Empty audio case here, plus rope and duct tape in the back," the voice said. My stomach turned thinking about what Marcel had planned to do with those items. The search continued as officers called out different rooms and areas they were checking. Someone mentioned the warehouse had way more rooms than they expected from outside. "Locked door back here," an officer reported. "Lock looks new, and there's dust disturbed all around it." We heard them discussing whether to break it down or try to pick the lock. Wyatt told them to breach it immediately given the circumstances, and we heard the sound of something heavy hitting wood. The door must have broken because suddenly there was shouting over the radio. "We need paramedics now," someone yelled, and Ms. Arellano's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair while Principal Graves rushed to help her. The radio went quiet for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Every second that passed without news made my chest feel tighter and tighter. Finally, Wyatt's radio crackled again with a voice we'd been waiting to hear. "We found her. She's conscious, but needs medical attention for dehydration." Ms. Arellano broke down sobbing with relief, so intense her whole body shook. Principal Graves wrapped his arms around her in a hug while she cried. "Paramedics are treating her now," the officer continued. "She's going to be okay, just needs fluids and rest." The relief in the office was overwhelming as everyone started breathing normally again. Wyatt was coordinating with the units about securing the scene and getting Melissa to the hospital. He mentioned they needed to process the warehouse as a crime scene and look for Marcel. The officers reported finding blankets and more water bottles in the room where Melissa was kept. It looked like Marcel had been planning to keep her there for a long time based on the supplies. They also found a notebook with rambling writing about protecting Melissa from the world. One officer said the writing didn't make much sense, but kept mentioning saving her from toxic people. Ms. Arellano was trying to compose herself enough to call her husband with the news. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone, but she managed to dial. When he answered, she just said, "They found her. She's alive," before breaking down again. Principal Graves took the phone and explained the rest, while Mrs. Arellano cried with relief. Wyatt was still on his radio coordinating the transport to the hospital. He told them to have a detective meet them there to take Melissa's statement when she was ready. The paramedics reported she was stable, and they were starting transport immediately. Mrs. Arellano stood up and said she needed to get to the hospital right away. Principal Graves offered to drive her, but she said her husband was already on his way to pick her up. We watched through the window as a car pulled up fast, and she ran out to meet him. They drove off toward the hospital before anyone could say anything else. The office felt strange without the immediate crisis, but there was still work to do. Wyatt was talking to other officers about Marcel and his mother still being missing. They had units watching both of their houses and checking other possible locations. Someone mentioned they should check other properties the family might have owned in the past. An officer came back into the office 20 minutes later with news from the warehouse team. They'd found the maintenance room where Marcel kept Melissa, and it was worse than we thought. The room had blankets spread on the floor, cases of water bottles, boxes of granola bars, and canned food stacked in the corner. He'd installed a battery-powered lamp and even brought in some books and magazines. The officer said it looked like Marcel was planning to keep her there for weeks, or maybe months, based on all the supplies. My stomach turned thinking about Melissa trapped in that small room, while Marcel acted out whatever sick fantasy he had. The officers also found a notebook Marcel left behind, filled with pages and pages of rambling writing. One officer was reading parts of it out loud to Wyatt, and it was all about protecting Melissa from people who didn't understand her potential. He wrote about how the school was poisoning her mind, and only he could save her from becoming another victim of the system. The writing got more and more crazy as it went on, talking about destiny and special connections, and how Melissa would thank him one day. Marcel and his mother were still missing, though, which made everyone nervous. The paramedics had Melissa on a stretcher now and were wheeling her toward the ambulance. Ms. Arellano was right beside her daughter, holding her hand and crying. Before they loaded Melissa into the ambulance, Ms. Arellano turned back toward us. She walked over with tears running down her face and hugged both Catalina and me so tight I could barely breathe. She kept saying thank you over and over, telling us we saved her daughter's life by speaking up about what we noticed. Then she ran back to the ambulance and climbed in beside Melissa. The ambulance pulled away with its lights flashing but no siren, which meant Melissa was stable. Officer Wyatt came over to where we were standing and told us we did a great job helping with the investigation. He said most people wouldn't have connected the dots about the locker and the audio case. He took down our names and phone numbers in case the detectives needed to ask us more questions later. Then he told us we should head home and let the police handle everything from here. Principal Graves said the school day was basically over anyway, and our parents had been notified to pick us up. As we were walking toward the parking lot, Wyatt's radio crackled with urgent news. Marcel's mother's silver car had been spotted at a gas station about 40 miles north on the interstate. The gas station clerk recognized them from the news alert that just went out. State police were already responding and setting up roadblocks on all the exits near that area. Wyatt ran toward his patrol car while calling for backup units to head north immediately. The parking lot was chaos with parents arriving, news vans setting up, and police cars racing out with sirens blaring. Ian's mom picked him up first, then Jaden's dad arrived looking worried. Catalina and I waited together until our rides came, both of us still processing everything that happened. That night I barely slept, checking my phone constantly for updates. The news said Marcel and his mother were still on the run, but police expected to catch them soon. They showed Melissa's school photo on TV and talked about the brave students who helped rescue her. My parents kept asking if I was okay, and honestly, I didn't know how to answer. The next morning, the school felt completely different when I walked in. It was quieter than usual, but also felt like everyone was more connected somehow. Groups of students were huddled together talking in low voices about Melissa and what she went through. Teachers looked tired but relieved, and several were hugging students who seemed upset. Everyone kept talking about how brave Melissa was during her ordeal and how lucky we were that she survived. The story had spread through social media overnight, and kids from other schools were messaging us to ask what really happened. During homeroom, Mrs. Singleton updated us on Melissa's condition. She said Melissa was recovering well at the hospital and might even be able to go home in a few days. She was dehydrated and traumatized from the experience, but physically she wasn't hurt, which felt like a miracle considering what could have happened. Mrs. Singleton said Melissa's doctors were amazed at how strong she was mentally, that she never gave up hope, even when things looked bad. Right before lunch, we got word that Marcel and his mother had finally been caught. They were arrested at a motel near the state border after someone recognized their car in the parking lot. The weird part was, they didn't even try to run or resist when police surrounded them. Marcel seemed confused about why everyone was so upset, like he genuinely didn't understand what he'd done wrong. His mother was crying and kept saying she was just trying to help her son. Later that afternoon, the police got a call from someone named Cameron Barry. He'd shared a room with Marcel at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital and saw the news coverage. Cameron told them Marcel had been planning this for months, constantly talking about a student he needed to rescue from the toxic school environment. He said Marcel would stay up all night writing in notebooks about his plans and drawing maps of the school. Cameron had tried to tell the doctors, but they thought it was just part of Marcel's delusions. By the end of the day, the school announced they were bringing in counselors to help students process what happened. Even though most of us didn't know Melissa personally, having our school violated like that affected everyone. Kids were scared, angry, confused about how someone could just walk in and take a student. The counselors set up in the library and classrooms, ready to talk to anyone who needed help dealing with the trauma. Catalina grabbed my arm the next morning and pulled me toward the library where they'd moved most of the counseling sessions. We signed our names on the clipboard outside and waited with about 15 other kids for our turn. The counselor, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, called us in together since we'd both been involved in helping find Melissa. She had us sit in the soft chairs by the window and asked us to walk through everything we'd noticed that day. Catalina started explaining about the social media posts and the locker photo, while I told her about overhearing the officers and connecting the audio case to the drama department. The counselor took notes and nodded as we talked. Then she leaned forward and told us we should feel proud for speaking up when something didn't feel right. She said most people would have ignored those small details, but we trusted our instincts, and it made all the difference. We left feeling better about everything, though seeing Ms. Arellano's empty desk when we passed the office still made my stomach twist. The rest of that week dragged by with everyone walking around in a daze and teachers struggling to get through lessons. 7 days after they found Melissa, Principal Graves announced during morning announcements that she would be visiting the school that afternoon. The whole building buzzed with nervous energy as kids cleaned their lockers and straightened desks like we were preparing for some important guest. Around 2 o'clock, Melissa walked through the front doors with her parents on either side of her. She looked smaller somehow, wearing jeans and an oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up, even though it was warm outside. Kids stopped and stared as she made her way down the hallway, some waving tentatively, while others just watched in silence. She went to the office first, where Principal Graves and several teachers were waiting, then spent about 20 minutes in there before coming back out. During lunch the next day, Catalina and I were eating our sandwiches when we saw Melissa walking toward our table with her mom beside her. She came straight over and wrapped her arms around Catalina first, then turned and hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "They told me you guys helped connect everything that led them to find me." Her mom stood there with tears running down her face, squeezing both our hands and thanking us over and over. Melissa sat with us for a few minutes, picking at a bag of chips her mom had brought, and we could see how her hand shook when she reached for her water bottle. She said she wasn't ready to come back full-time yet, but wanted to see everyone and let them know she was okay. Before leaving, she hugged us both again and promised she'd be back soon. That same afternoon, workers started installing new security cameras at every entrance and hallway intersection. They drilled holes in the ceiling tiles and ran thick black cables along the walls, connecting everything to a new monitoring station in the main office. Principal Graves sent out an email explaining the new entry procedures that would start Monday. Everyone would need to scan their student ID at the door, even during lunch when kids usually just walked in and out freely. The metal detectors that had been sitting in storage for years were finally set up at the main entrance. Parents complained about the prison-like atmosphere, but the school board wouldn't budge on the new safety measures. 3 days later, the local news reported that Marcel had been formally charged with kidnapping and false imprisonment. The article included his booking photo where he stared at the camera with blank eyes, like he didn't understand why he was there. His mother faced charges too for aiding in the kidnapping, though her lawyer was already arguing she'd been manipulated by her mentally ill son. The article mentioned she'd been the one driving the van and had rented the warehouse under a fake name. She'd also bought the supplies Marcel used to keep Melissa captive, including the locks for the door and the soundproofing materials he'd installed. Ms. Arellano came back to work the following Monday, but she was different. She'd jump whenever a door slammed and kept checking her phone every few minutes. The school gave her flexible hours, so she could leave whenever she needed to check on Melissa at home. Sometimes we'd see her car pulling out of the parking lot in the middle of the day, and she'd return an hour later looking calmer. Other office staff covered for her without complaint, everyone understanding what she was going through. 2 months passed before Marcel's sentencing hearing arrived. The judge reviewed his psychiatric history, including his escape from Millbrook and the detailed journals doctors found describing his obsession with saving students from the school. The prosecutor pushed for prison time, but the judge decided Marcel needed treatment more than punishment. He sentenced Marcel to indefinite psychiatric commitment with yearly reviews to determine if he could ever be released safely. His mother's hearing happened the next week, where she stood before the judge crying and apologizing. The judge acknowledged she'd been trying to help her son, but said her choices had endangered an innocent child. She got 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service, plus mandatory counseling to understand how her son had manipulated her. The courtroom was packed with people from the school and Melissa's extended family, all watching as she was led out in handcuffs to process her probation paperwork. Melissa started coming back to the school for half days about 3 weeks after the trial ended. She'd arrive after first period and leave before lunch, slowly working up to staying longer. Kids gave her space but made sure to smile and wave when they saw her in the halls. By the end of the month, she was staying through 5th period, though she still looked tired and jumped at sudden noises. The old Melissa who laughed loudly in the hallways was gone, replaced by someone quieter and more careful about her surroundings. Eventually, she built up to full days, arriving with everyone else in the morning and staying through dismissal. One afternoon, I saw her signing up for something on the bulletin board outside the guidance office. It was a support group for trauma survivors that met Thursdays after school in room 205. The next Thursday, I walked by and saw about 8 kids sitting in a circle. Some I recognized as dealing with completely different problems like family deaths or car accidents, all supporting each other through their various struggles. The drama department started getting rid of all their old equipment cases the following week, and I helped Missy Perez carry them to the dumpster behind the school. She showed me the new ones they ordered with special locks that needed 2 different keys to open and joked they were kidnapping proof, then immediately covered her mouth and apologized for saying something so insensitive. The new cases arrived 3 days later, and the whole theater crew spent an afternoon transferring all the sound equipment and lights into them, while Melissa watched from the auditorium seats, not ready to help yet, but wanting to be around the familiar space. Our lunch group changed too after everything that happened. Ian stopped cracking jokes every 5 seconds and actually listened when people talked about serious stuff, while Jaden started walking the younger kids to their buses if they seemed nervous about going to their cars alone. Catalina and I noticed how we all sat closer together at lunch now, not spread out across the whole table like before, and how we always made sure everyone got home safe before leaving school ourselves. Principal Graves called us into his office one morning in March and asked if Catalina and I would speak at the upcoming safety assembly about recognizing suspicious behavior and speaking up when something feels wrong. We both felt our stomachs drop at the idea of standing in front of the whole school, but knew it was important. So we spent the next week writing out what we wanted to say and practicing in front of the bathroom mirror at home. The assembly happened on a Thursday morning, and my hands shook the entire time I held the microphone, but seeing teachers nodding along and younger students taking notes made me push through the nerves. Melissa's parents showed up at the school board meeting the next month with a whole presentation about starting a foundation to improve security systems and mental health resources in schools across the district. Her dad had spreadsheets showing how much everything would cost, while her mom talked about prevention being cheaper than dealing with trauma after something happens, and by the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to support their proposal. The foundation officially launched in April with a fundraiser at the community center that raised over $30,000 in one night from local businesses and parents who wanted to help. By May, everything at the school felt different, but also weirdly normal, like we'd all adjusted to this new reality where we paid more attention to each other and locked doors that used to stay open. Melissa came back full-time right after spring break and even auditioned for the spring production of Our Town, getting cast as Emily, which felt like a huge deal since it meant being on stage in front of everyone again. Opening night arrived, and the whole auditorium was packed with people who'd heard her story and wanted to support her, though she told me later she tried not to think about that and just focused on her lines and blocking. Watching her up there delivering Emily's graveyard speech about appreciating life while you have it made half the audience cry, including her parents who sat in the front row recording everything on their phones. After the show, when we were helping strike the set, she pulled me aside backstage and said she refused to let Marcel take theater away from her, since it was the one place she'd always felt most like herself. She said performing that night felt like taking back something he'd tried to steal, and seeing her smile while saying it made all the scary stuff we'd been through feel worth it somehow. Graduation came faster than expected that year, maybe because we were all ready to move forward, and as we lined up in our caps and gowns, everyone seemed more serious than previous graduating classes. Principal Graves mentioned in his speech how our class had shown incredible strength and unity during a difficult time, though he didn't mention specifics since everyone knew what he meant anyway. Walking across that stage to get my diploma felt different from I'd imagined it would back in September, like we'd all grown up faster than we were supposed to, but also learned things that actually mattered. Looking back at everything now from college, I'm glad Catalina and I spoke up when we noticed the connections between Marcel's old photos and my open locker. That morning with the police car that started everything feels like it happened years ago instead of just last spring, but it taught me that paying attention and trusting your instincts can literally save someone's life. That's all for today's chat. Thanks for hanging out. It honestly feels like catching up with a buddy. We'll do it again soon.